This is Barrie, a city constantly evolving. At any time, a whole host of pressures challenge the intricate tapestry of city government. In this series, we will explore the priorities deemed essential for progress, even if they don't always inspire unanimous applause. Join me each week for a candid conversation with a member of our city government as we uncover the stories behind the scenes of Barrie, a city on the move. Welcome to Barrie, City on the Move. I'm Arif, and it's my pleasure to be your host. Wherever you're receiving this content on cable or at home streaming online on YouTube, I'm really glad you've tuned in. In this series, we look to explore the inner workings and the relationships with governance in the city on how to deliver that quality of life, whether it's from a governance and legislative perspective or whether it's from an operational perspective. And oftentimes, including today, it includes their dynamic and healthy relationships with third parties that help bring and deliver quality of life to residents at home. You know, that quality of life that we've come to expect from the city that, well, we pay taxes to and choose to live, work, and play. Today I have a great privilege and really excited to have a conversation with someone I haven't had a conversation with in a number of years, and that's Craig Stevens, who's the director of Downtown Barrie BIA. Craig, I'm really glad that you were able to take time out of your schedule and join me here. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely, and I think we should start with getting our audience familiar with that term that we often hear, or we wonder how certain things are happening in the downtown, but sort of what was the impetus, what was the catalyst behind it, and that's this organization or this entity that's known in many cities across the province, the country, if not the world, called the BIA. And really, what is a BIA?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll sort of start at a high level because people, again, your audience may not sort of realize how prevalent BIAs are. They've started back in 1970, and in Ontario specifically, there's over 300 BIAs. A BIA, first part, we'll deal with the acronym. So it's a business improvement area. And I know you're probably thinking, well, area, what does that mean, as opposed to association? Area really means that within each municipality, it is a defined area. It usually encompasses the main street, the historic downtown of a city or a town. And so it was defined really as wanting to highlight that. Now, within that area, a BIA represents the businesses and the commercial property within that space. So it's very specific. It's not residential, but it's a commercial property and the businesses within it. And again, for downtown Barrie, that means well over 300 businesses and 200 property owners. So again, it's one of these sort of terms that you do hear, and you wonder what it is. The organization is small. Staffing usually is sort of 2 to 5 staff members. It consists of a board of directors. Those directors are volunteer, and they're representatives from those commercial properties or businesses. They carry a term that is congruent with city council, and they're elected, and they manage and oversee the strategic direction of the organization. Myself as the executive director and my team implement that strategic direction throughout the term, and a lot of that is what you see in your main street happening.
So I'm going to sort of prod and dissect this a little bit, and I don't know how rich and good your memory is, but actually I did serve as a council rep for a moment, for a brief period on the BIA as one of the city's representatives to the BIA. But for the benefit of those at home who may not know that I did that and don't care that I did that, and in all honesty, here's the question that comes to mind though. If I was sitting at home watching this show, I'd be like, well, wait a second. It sounds to me like you're your own little government inside the government, because well, wait a second, there is a ward councillor who represents the downtown area, and the city as a whole has a council that represents the city as a whole. Yeah. What is the need? Why is there this separate entity that seems somewhat autonomous? Just for clarification, a BAA is not, it is arm's length to the city, is it not?
It is arm's length, yes. Yeah.
So help me out with some of that understanding.
That's a great question, and it digs in again some historical context. So yeah, so the formality of the organization is we have a section within the Municipal Act that creates this. We're a local committee of council. So just to your point, we're an arm's length, independently run organization. Our board of directors oversees, and signs off on budget. However, there is a city connection to it. The story, the history that goes to it is actually quite an interesting. So back in 1970, as I mentioned, the very first BIA was Bloor West Village. And at the onset of 1970, if some of us remember, that was suburbia. People were leaving the downtown cores in city centers and going out to suburbia. The malls were prevalent. Those suburban subdivisions and whatnot were being built, and people were sprawling out. And so a group of property owners in Bloor West Village got together and said, we need to do something. We see this exodus, and we need people to stay put. What can we do collectively to make an impact? And so you looked at, the mall. And mall was a great example, even though it was competition. You've got all the stores in the mall, and at the time when malls were prevalent, you had two anchors typically. At that time, it would probably be the Sears and Bay, if you remember those stores, sure. Right? And then, as those two anchors supported all the stores in between and created a travel path, and within that travel path, you beautified it, you activated it. So if you think of the mall, you have benches, you might have a fireplace, you have those types of things that, again, continue and reinforce the trip. So that was the decision at the time, is like, how do we make the space between each one of our buildings, each one of our businesses, the public space, conducive to carry on that travel? And so that decision was, as a group, we create a volunteer situation where it's like we would just support as we see fit. But instead, what they decided to do was connect with the city and say, hey, we want to make this membership mandatory. So if you're within this area, as I mentioned, the business improvement area, you have no choice but are part of it. And we actually want to levy ourselves. And so again, that's the connection to the city. So our budget is a special levy, so it's only applied within our area. So tying back to the area, why that BIA is not an association, it's an area that goes into and funds the BIA through the budget. So that was the connection to the city, and the reason was that handful of property owners back in 1970 said, you know what? The best way that we feel we can do this collectively is if we all come together and levy ourselves, special levy ourselves. And I avoid I don't use the word tax specifically, because a levy, it's an investment. The business owners decided we're going to collectively invest in ourselves.
It's almost like a condo fee.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah,
almost like a condo fee. So there is a board of governors, there is a board of directors, there is a levy, and that is collected by the city and then written as a check to the BIA?
Correct.
So is it the property owner or the tenant who's paying that levy, or is it passed from the property owner to the tenant?
So it's yes and all that in that one sort of in that many questions. So ultimately, it goes to the property owner because it is applied to the commercial property. The assumption is that through a lease, it's passed down to the property or to the business owner.
Okay. Now you mentioned strategic plan, and you mentioned a few other things. So you also mentioned that there's a board of governance.
Yeah.
And in order to be on this board, it sounds to me like, if I remember correctly, you're supposed to have an interest in the downtown.
Yeah, you have to have an actual interest, call it a vested interest for lack of a better term. So either you're the property owner, which you'd be able to sort of establish with all the proper papers, or you're a leasee of one of those properties as a business owner, and again, you'd have a piece of paper that identifies that that's the case. Those are your set members that are able to participate. You could also sponsor, so someone could sponsor someone outside, but typically, more times than not, it's either a property owner or B, a business owner that has a lease connected to that property.
Now, you talked about having a strategic plan. We're going to get into all the things that the BIA is up to, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, et cetera.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this thing that you said was a strategic plan.
Yeah.
Sounds very formal.
Yeah.
Sounds similar to a strategic plan that the municipality has.
Yeah.
Is there a connection, or is there any dialogue between establishing the BIA's strategic plan and the alignment with perhaps the term of council's strategic plan?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And ideally, that's the best case scenario. I'd have to say that it's not always the case. Again, representing business owners, property owners, some that have been, in particular our downtown 50 plus years that have crossed generations. Everybody, we all have our ideas of what it would be. But again, that's the job of the board and the job of the team and my position to, collectively get the ideas, look through them, filter through them, and ideally, align with the current council's strategic plan. We've been fortunate that the downtown has been a strategic priority for my time in this position, which is it's getting close to 20 years now, and that alignment just ultimately makes things easier because we know it's a priority. We know the investment is worthwhile, and we also understand the return we're going to get on that investment.
So I'm going to break with a little bit of convention. You mentioned almost 20 years. I'm going to put you on a little bit of a spot, but I'm going to do it as carefully as I can. There was a period in which you stepped away from the BIA. We'll talk about in another segment some of the accomplishments that got us to where we are. But ultimately, let's just say one party or the other decided maybe it was time for some change, because 20 years can be a long time. Your time away from the BIA was not all that long, but long enough that it was noticed, and for one reason or another, you're back.
Yeah.
So was that a healthy gap?
It was a healthy gap, and in the moment, you're working in the moment and whatnot. And I think after the fact, you realize, one of the things it does. You get to a certain point, and it's nice, to step back and literally. It's funny. I always position myself as the executive director to be 30,000 feet above for my business owners and property owners to say, where they're going to be in their, 1,000 square feet, and it becomes very narrow. I try and be that 30,000 feet to say, hey, okay, your 1,000 feet times the other 500 businesses represents this. So for me, bringing it back to me, to be able to step back and go 30,000 feet and have a different perspective, because I was caught in my little bubble as well. It was great. I was able to come back and, we had done a lot of work prior to me leaving with what I call it the bones and the sort of the infrastructure that downtown. I know we'll talk about that probably in the future. And now there was a change. COVID created a change for all of us, and now it was about utilizing that new infrastructure and bringing people down. And so coming back fresh, coming back with being able to get myself up and into that sort of higher level to look at it was refreshing, and it's really exciting what we've got happening now downtown and what we see what's going to happen for the future.
Excellent. Well, I think it's a perfect time to take a quick break. The theme of the show regarding downtown is really, challenges and opportunities. Let's get into some of those challenges that we come back, some challenges that may be obvious to many, or maybe sort of some behind-the-scenes challenges that you have to navigate and figure out on behalf of your member organizations and businesses. So more from Craig Stevens, the Executive Director of Downtown Barrie's Business Improvement Area, BIA, when we come back from this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Craig Stevens, Executive Director of Downtown Barrie Business Improvement Area, BIA, is with me. We're talking about, well, really, what is a BIA? What do they do? What's their purpose? And that's sort of what we covered in the first segment. I wanted to get into some of the challenges, Craig, of what it is to operate, again, oftentimes behind the scenes, whether it's 30,000 feet or getting into the granular. I was going to say unless you've been living under a rock. I don't know if that's politically correct or incorrect, but obviously there are some things that are a little bit synonymous with downtowns.
Yep.
Barrie is not immune to that. Anybody who's ever ventured outside Barrie, and it's amazing actually, sorry, tangent, but if you live south of the border, there was a period, I don't know if it's still accurate, that 80% of people living in the United States don't even have a passport. They may not have left their home county, their home state, their country.
Yeah.
I don't know what the comparable statistics are for Canada. I imagine they're not the same.
Right.
But many people who are in Barrie think that the challenges of our downtown are somehow unique or somehow something that somebody should be able to snap their fingers and solve.
Yeah.
You're right in the thick of it for all intents and purposes as a BIA, and I'm going to bring that up as a challenge. Challenge can mean, can have a negative intonation to it, or it can have a neutral or a positive intonation. It's still a challenge. You're in the downtown, you're representing about 300 business owners and property owners. You were very specific to say not residential in terms of your focus. And then you also talked about that sort of moment in time that acted really as a transition from the way things were to the way things are now, and now that you've come back in this role as executive director. Talk to me about some of the accomplishments that the BIA made during your first stint, if we'll call it that, your first tenure, and things that were part of this mission and this focus and this strategy, and some of those accomplishments. And great, was it mission accomplished, or did suddenly that change that you were referring to really upset the entire plan and create a new set of challenges and a new set of opportunities?
Yeah, again, great question, and I'd have to start off saying that I'm proud of the journey that the organization has taken, and I think I got to give credit to the boards of the time, and in particular the chairs of the time. I go back to.
I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to throw out a couple names of people who were really part of, I'm going to call it version 1. It wasn't necessarily 1970s version 1, but about 10 years ago or so, you had folks who were really living legends within the downtown and the city. People like Wayne Hay, who's still a very active person and heavily invested in his downtown community. Tom Ambo Jr., I believe, was a part of that role. You've probably got a list of people who were part of that segment of getting some of those things accomplished, and I think they deserve the credit.
Yeah, Janet Kemp was the start. She hired me 20 years ago, and the goal at that point in time when I joined was really to reestablish credibility with an organization. So, putting the organization in a way that it had a healthy budget, that we were able to do what we wanted to do. It was comparable and comparable to other cities our size, or downtowns within cities that were our size, and really set the foundation with a good, solid strategic plan. And the strategic plan really was, it went beyond the term. It was I'd arguably say it was a 10-year strategic plan in terms of the comprehension of it and the content of it, and that set the stage. Out of that plan and through transitions of boards, and you mentioned Wayne Hay was really instrumental in taking specific components, which was Meridian Place, transforming Fred Grant Square, that we're very familiar with from an historic standpoint, and big history, like 200 years of history in that little area that contained what was the original post office. It was the station Gore because of the train station. It has the cenotaph, and I've got a really good presentation that shows the progression of that space up into Meridian, which Meridian was, again, it was a fantastic project that brought so many partnerships together. And you talk, I think, you mentioned the top in terms of the essence of this show is, all the strategic partnerships. This, that undertaking, involves so many different groups.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in though again. You were faced with, as a figurehead and a leader on the project, you were faced with a variety of challenges and some pushback. Hands off the sacred land, for example. A lot of people don't like change. Leave it as it is. Leave things alone. I remember when things were like this, and I don't want it to change. What is the mission in terms of a BIA? What, again, back to, And we got to be careful, because does a BIA have the right to mess with something as sacred as a cenotaph? Right? I mean, that's a question I think is a valid question. So how are you handling it? How's it being done? But what is the purpose of a BIA at its core? You represent 300 business owners inside of a specific geographic area. Overall, if you were to summarize in one sentence what your mission is, it is? In one word might be hard, but we're supporting those businesses. And so if there was a core function, is bringing people to the core. And so this area that you sort of identified as the Cenotaph and Fred Grant Square and having historic relevance, it's also sort of like a bit of a nucleus. It's a gathering point, and it was determined by that board at that time under some of your recommendation, I would strongly suggest, and the research that you did, that it was an underutilized space in terms of programming, and programming really became the key action word. Talk to me about the importance of that.
Programming is huge, and again, with this project, which was, it was really a public-private partnership at its core. And I think, you asked about those challenges. So, all those things that you had just mentioned were taken into consideration prior to really putting the proposal forth. So what would the local Legion, what would Base Board think about having the Cenotaph repositioned, and actually repositioned in a more prominent position, which ultimately they were ecstatic, because a lot of cases now, cenotaphs are actually being built around and almost like put to the side, as opposed to creating more prominence. And then again, as you mentioned, the challenge around, that sort of that historical sort of set of land, but what if we repositioned that land, still recognized it? What we were able to do is build in the 200 years of history within the space and modernize it so that it can now establish another 200 years of history. So again, all those bits and pieces were taken into consideration as initial challenges and brought forth in terms of opportunities. And then ultimately, you said the programming is massive. So the more people that we could bring downtown, we know that impacts the downtown and supports our businesses and our property owners. So this space it's free of traffic. It's a beautiful space. It's a comfortable space. It allows so much different types of programming to happen. And by programming, I mean, like, it can be a dance gathering, or it can be thousands of people taking in a concert or performance, or seeing your kids perform or whatnot. So that's solely a multi-use space that allows for all those different opportunities.
We'll get into some of the programming in an upcoming segment in just a few minutes. But again, the idea was to activate. So these are some of the action words: activate, program, et cetera. These spaces, all with the goal of bringing traffic downtown. Now, there's a strategy. It's a self-serving strategy, if you will, and that strategy is, there's a theory, I think, in this study that said something about, number of people or volume of people, and then factor of time equals dollars.
So it's an economic impact, is sort of the technical term of it. So we know that, if we have put in an event on and 10,000 people come to take in that event, there's an economic impact of it, meaning that those people are going to come down and support the downtown financially. So they're going to take in a meal. It can be as simple as a coffee. It can be as full as a dinner. They might purchase something from a retail standpoint. They might connect with a service. There's those connections that are there. And I think, what I like to say is that, why should you support your downtown? The key difference, and I think it's, the simple key difference, is that the people that own these businesses, and a lot of times own these properties, are literally your friends, family, and neighbors. They are as local as you're going to get. They've decided to invest in literally their own backyard. And there is the comparison to our larger commercial areas that have some of those brand corporate multinational stores. They don't do the same thing. They're not typically from our local area. A lot of that money is being taken out of the local area as opposed to being put back in. You support our downtown business, whatever profit they may have goes back into that business and makes it better the next time.
So now you bring a great point. There are obviously businesses in the north end and the south end. We're talking about the bit of the center core.
Yeah.
Obviously geographically and topographically, Barrie is somewhat uniquely positioned that this downtown is right on the waterfront, lakefront, a bit of the hub. Let's go back to the segment one where you talked about there is a mandatory participation should you choose to either purchase property or open up a storefront or a business in the downtown BIA area. All of a sudden you are volunteering to pay this levy to participate.
Yep.
Now, if you're a tenant in a mall or in a strip plaza in another area or quadrant of the city, you're paying a different fee. You're paying a lease, and that lease has some of those similar characteristics for that particular piece of land. There are those who would argue that the city has favoritism for its downtown, understanding the model and the working model and the dynamic of a BIA. That's favoritism, but that extra funding is almost you're volunteering for it.
Yeah, and again, as best as you describe it, it's self-funded. So that levy, our money that we do what we do, is only paid for by our business owners and our property owners. Any resident within the downtown does not pay that. Any resident outside the downtown does not pay for that, nor does any commercial property outside the downtown pay for that. So we self-fund our initiatives, and again, another example that I'd like to use is historically our main streets, our downtowns, like I said, we go back 200 years for our downtown. You could probably pick out numbers across Canada, across the world, and of the historic relevance of our main streets. And again, I asked the question is that when you go and travel somewhere, and you want to understand where you're traveling to or from or what the essence of the area is, where do you go? And probably more times than not, you will go to that main street. You'll go to that city center, that square, like Meridian Place, to understand and truly understand what the essence of the place that you're traveling to. And so I think that, to me, that's important. And to support that is important, whether you live in the proximity that you can walk to downtown, or you might have to take a bus or a car. It's worth supporting because it really is, it's who you are as a community.
Mm-hmm. We got to go to break, but I'm going to leave you with this thought to process while we're on break. Recently, I had a good friend and someone I admire and respect greatly, and who's been a valued contributor and ambassador of the city, and that's Kathleen Traynor, Executive Director of Tourism Barrie. And she brought forward some interesting conversation and idea, basically analyzing or looking at the difference between municipalities that invest in their downtown versus don't.
Yep.
And I want you to think about that and maybe come back with some examples during your 20-year journey. Basically give us some case studies.
Sure.
All right,
Sounds
so
great.
we'll be back with more from Craig Stevens, Executive Director of Downtown Barrie BIA, right after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move. Craig Stevens, Executive Director of the Downtown Barrie BIA, and I are having a conversation around really what it is to be a BIA. We've now figured out who you are and why you exist and sort of what goes on behind the scenes. To a degree, we'll get into some more detail. We've talked about some of the history. We've talked about, what is unique about a downtown, including some of the challenges. Talked a little bit about how we got to where we are today. Let's move into, some of the actual effort and investments that are taking shape right now. What are some of the opportunities that you're choosing to embrace and why they're being strategically chosen? And I also want to talk a little bit about some of the, oftentimes those who complain or those who compare, they sort of look at half the story, but not necessarily the other half of the story, and we'll talk about what that other half of the story looks like as well. But let's get into some of this. You've got a budget that you work with. You've got a strategic plan. That strategic plan can in turn can include some short-term, medium, and long-term goals, as we've discussed. There's the overall mission. But let's talk about sort of how it's going right now and what you're currently actively pursuing.
Yeah. As I mentioned in the earlier, a big focus of the past boards were around that hardscape. How can we shape and make an investment in our own backyard, which we talked about Meridian Place. The additional, the carryover of that was actually the streetscape. So many of your audience have been downtown, have seen a new Dunlop Street. So it's now got curbless sidewalks. We've got these bollards that allow us to have parking or remove parking. And our patio program, which was a pilot, at one point you might remember the old docks and boardwalks that we had in the downtown. That really set the stage for what we have now, which is the seamless interconnection of patios and sidewalk throughout the downtown. We don't have to build those boardwalks anymore. That was the focus. Now is the focus of bringing people downtown. Giving people reason to come, congregate, meet family, friends, and neighbors in the downtown, and so it's sort of gone from hard plans to, I'm going to call it soft plans. That infrastructure, that type of backyard investment, those renovations are done, and now we want to bring people back into our house and say, hey, look at this new area, look at this place, let's have a good time within it.
So what I heard you say is we did some beta testing, and that beta testing included the boardwalks, the dock,
Yes.
the wood that was getting installed every spring and removed every fall, and that was a pilot project, some beta testing, and it's now proved itself to be wildly successful. In fact, you went from just, I think it was 3 or 6 in the first year to how many are people?
We're over 20, 25 now. It's amazing.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And the ability, they've actually even through city participation brought in some of those road closure temporary barricades to lock off for the Dunlop Street. Sorry, you have program names. Sorry,
for
the weekend.
Open Air Dunlop.
Open Air Dunlop.
Open Air
Sorry,
Dunlop,
I should have known that it was right there. Open Air Dunlop. But so again, dynamic use of the space.
That's a great way of putting it. Exactly, dynamic use of the space, because the space allows us to do that now. In its past form, you could do it, but it was kind of clunky, right? So having those hard curb sets, you had to provide areas and or apparatuses to be able to get up and over those, be it ramps or just transitions that way. Now it's fully accessible. Our downtown is fully accessible from a mobility standpoint and just from an ease of movement standpoint. It connects to our square, our main square, so it's got that hub. So now literally we look at it, we being the downtown, like the BIA, my team and board, look at it as a venue. So it's a venue now that, again, akin to a mall. Malls are competition, but you got to take some great aspects of a mall in terms of the development and the formation of it and apply it to our open area. And so now that ease of movement through the downtown is so much easier than it's ever been.
All right, so I'm gonna jump in. Malls are our competition. That in itself is a statement. But from an economics perspective, competition is healthy.
Yes.
There is a reason why all the car dealerships moved from wherever they were to the dealership row and strip that is Mapleview, for example, or Bayfield has some of that going on there as well. But all across North America, that is now a proven model that says line them all up.
Yeah.
Right? So competition is good. There's a reason why there's gas stations on every corner and or fast food restaurants beside themselves, beside each other. So there is a theory that says competition is good, choice is good, selection is good, and by the way, it's up to you to up your own game.
Yeah.
So in the downtown, though, I'm going to put you on the spot. It's not nice. It's just matter of fact. There are people who have something to say about the downtown, why they don't come down, why they dislike it, why they fear it, why there are people who will have these conversations. It's almost like it's a favorite topic of conversation of how bad something seems or feels.
Right.
We've had the police chief, Rich Johnson, on a number of times over the past 2 years, and he's been very clear that Barrie is an extremely safe city. The actual data says that it's a safe city. While there may be some things that are perceived, some behavioral or social disorder things that are perceived, statistically it's a very safe city. However, you have a science, you have a philosophy, you have a belief about downtowns and the feeling, the welcome feeling that people will get, but it requires some participation. Tell me about the science that you've studied.
Yeah, so again, first of all, I'd like to mention that, our police chief has been really, really supportive, and our police chiefs of the past, again, because I spanned the 20 years, have been really supportive of our downtown and understand those nuances that we are a safe downtown, we are a safe city, statistically. But again, you need to address the feelings. People will feel a certain way because if they see something that's not maybe familiar to them or that they're not sure what is happening, understanding, and so you have to be very cognizant of those feelings, and work with both. And our police chief currently. Chief Johnson has been amazing in understanding that, working with the numbers, and then working with his team and members to really make people feel safe. And downtowns, and Barrie isn't unique to this. Downtown Barrie isn't unique, but we are the hub of our challenges. There's again historic history that results in that. Barrie in particular. We're the largest urban center in our area. We have all the services that other outlying communities require, and so a lot of times the challenges of those communities Barrie adopts because we have the services that need those. Sometimes those services, shouldn't necessarily be Barrie's responsibility. I know there's been some initiatives. There has been some initiatives that have been effective that has addressed that.
The prisoner release program being stopped.
Exactly, and that's has had an enormous impact. But we're not unique. I'll tell a quick story, if I may. But I had the opportunity through the Ontario BIA Association to travel, and it was happened to be New York City, and it brought people in from all over, literally all over the world, all over the U.S., all over Canada. And we talk about like multi-million, millions of population centers to, centers that have thousands of people. And there wasn't one moment in that summit where someone wasn't saying, what are you doing about your social challenges? Meaning that whether you had 2 or 3 million people as a population or 20,000, we were all collectively in the same boat, trying to understand the complexity and hopefully the solution of some of our social challenges that are prevalent around. And so Barrie is not, we're not immune to that. We have our challenges. I know that our city staff, our county, our service partners, police, collectively are all working on it. And in my opinion, and what I've seen over the 20 years is that this has the most alignment. We're currently under the most alignment to make success.
And is it making a difference?
Yes, it is making a difference. 100% it's making a difference. And again, what people might feel or see, I understand, because I think what people are seeing isn't what, as a mid-sized city or downtown. Again, some of your audience might remember more, but I remember 37,000 people. We're 160,000 now. We're not what we were at 37,000. And so I still remember what that is, right? What the community was at that time. But what we're seeing now is something that a mid-sized city experiences, and especially with Barrie's growth over the years. We were the fastest growing community for how long, that sometimes we can't keep up with that ourselves.
So there was a period when Barrie's downtown was known as sort of like the bar and nightclub strip.
Yep.
And well earned. I don't know of how many there were, 20 certainly within walking distance, and it was great.
Yep.
College kids came down, et cetera. But it wasn't without its downside. There was the behavior issues and things like that. And there were almost two types of Barrie. There was the daytime Barrie, and then there was the after 5 o'clock, there was the nighttime Barrie that kind of kicked in. There's still a little bit of that feedback regarding sort of stores that all close around 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon and leave the evening to the nightclub scene.
Yep.
The goal was to bring population down, to sort of extend the hours of sort of congregation and foot traffic in the downtown. What's going on with that?
Yeah, another great question. So a great perspective of looking at downtown. Again, it's not a 9 to 5. It's a 24/7. And so again, I'm going to say you got to come up to look at that perspective. And what we noticed was there's daytime traffic. There's a lot of daytime. So 9 to 5, you got a flux of traffic. To your point, and it's changed. Again, we can talk about all kinds of really interesting change that the downtown has taken, whether it's been clothing, like retail versus nightclubs. Like now, it's not so much nightclubs. Now it's pubs and more of a dining, like 6 to 11 time frame, and it has a lot to do with just how we socially interact, and even how the young folks are socially interacting as well. It's very different than from you and I back in our day. But what we found was that that the perception of the night, which you want a healthy entertainment time frame. Like you want a healthy entertainment district. It's part of that 24-hour mix. But what was happening with us is that retail stores were closing at 5, 6, or 7, and then there was this quiet zone, right? And that entertainment district, which was very healthy, came in like a wave. So everyone that was taking on the entertainment at that time was coming in at 11 o'clock. And the nature of that industry is that you had to be out at, again, our time would have been 1, but I think it's like 2 or 3 now. I don't know because I don't participate so much anymore. But at that time, everybody had to leave, and so that dynamic was it has so much energy, and it can be intimidating, and people mixing in that way, shape, or form. Lots of stuff happens, and so what we try to do in the patio program, going back to that, was an impetus to it to say, hey, let's try and fill that evening, that 5 o'clock to 9 or 10 o'clock gap, so that when that entertainment time frame came in, it wasn't this tidal wave, it was more of a flow, nicely transition. And now you had sort of this even keel around that 24/7. Not much happens, to be honest with you, between 3 and 6 in the downtown, so we'll call that the quiet zone. If you want 3 hours of sleep, perfect time to do it. But balance out, or not even balance it out, but just make sure there's a nice transition of flow of activity.
So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about where we are and where we're going. And again, we touched on it right at the beginning. What worked yesterday might have been great for yesterday, isn't necessarily going to be right for tomorrow. And I want to talk to you about sort of incremental change versus milestone change, and really what the investment and the alignment with that investment looks like for the near to midterm in the downtown Barrie scene. So
perfect.
More from Craig Stevens, Executive Director of Downtown Barrie BIA, right after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and we've really talked about the evolution of the Downtown BIA. I'm going to call it over the last 20 years because that is the tenure of which my guest today, Craig Stevens, who's the Executive Director of Downtown BIA, Barrie BIA, has really had an influence and a guiding hand through a number of boards and a number of city councils. You've been a bit of a steady rudder guiding this experiment that is community, that is growing the idea of community. And before the last segment, I sort of teed up our friend Kathleen Traynor, who's the Executive Director of Tourism Barrie. And the whole point of you being here is also to show that cities don't operate in a vacuum. They don't operate just by the amazing work of a council, and there is some amazing work, and it's challenging work. Love it or hate it, love a specific thing or not, that investment in time and energy and commitment to your city is considerable. But it can't be done without the partnership of staff members who work for the municipality, but as well as partner agencies. We've mentioned Kathleen at Tourism Barrie. We talk about you here. We talk about the police chief. We also talk about, without naming them, other social-based organizations that serve some of our vulnerable people or people from outside the community who need the services that can only be found in a larger community like Barrie. Yep. That is a large tee-up to talk to the fact that really what you've been talking about is constant investment in a state of constant change.
Yes.
and you rely on some data, and you rely on your peers in other BIA districts, et cetera, but you've learned something over 20 years, I presume, and that's what you bring to the table here. What are some of the things that you've seen between cities that actually actively invest and don't? It seems almost obvious, but I'm going to ask you anyway to describe it.
Oh, it's those that invest, it's apparent. I think about some people of your audience may have traveled to Kingston, Ontario. Kingston is a great example of a mutual investment in terms of what it can do for your downtown and what a downtown can look like. Elora is a great small example of what a small community investing in their main core area can do. And I think, you touched on partnerships. Partnerships are so critical, and especially for BIAs. As I mentioned at the top, we're a small organization. If you have 2 staff, that's great. If you're 5 staff, you're really lucky. And so to do anything, you have to partner. Partnering with Tourism Barrie, Kathleen Traynor has been amazing. Kathleen Traynor is the executive director for Tourism Barrie. I think her and I have almost the same tenure in each organization. That partnership, especially as a main street, is important because, as I said before, as a visitor, as an actual tourist, which is coming from 40-kilometer distance outwards in, a main street is representative of a tourist destination in terms of what you expect for the greater community. We might have a great waterfront, which we do. We might have great local attractions like skiing and golf and trails, but your downtown core, your main street, is also a part of that. And so to have that partnership is important, and understand what our main street does from a numbers data standpoint. So Kathleen is great at the data. We partner with her and her team to understand, our impact, which, as I talked about earlier, events and bringing people downtown. So we know now that, for example, our Butter Tart Festival that we're coming on a 3rd year now brings 37,000 people. We have unique IP addresses, which everyone has an IP address on their phone. That's all we know. We don't know the person, but we know that 37,000 people took in that event, and we also can understand who those people are in terms of just a demographic profile, general income, general education, general household dynamics. Which is great information on understanding who's coming to the downtown. Further, we've partnered with Invest Barrie, and now within the downtown, we've got pedestrian counters. So they just count literally a body. Again, there's no identification to it. But those 37,000 people, we now know where they travel within the downtown because we have these sensors from the east, starting in the east, going to the west, and within the square, Meridian Place. We know how those people travel through. So all that information is so important in terms of understanding how people take in the downtown and where they take it in. And then that also gives us guidance and awareness of how we can make changes. And you talk about incremental changes. We've made some very large changes in the past with these capital infrastructure changes. We're now really in a position, in a phase where we're looking at smaller dynamic changes. So, events are huge. And again, COVID was one of these, diamond in the roughs. I have to always get jitters when I say that word, as you can just see, but because it's time past. But we were able to look at our event profile, and people will be very familiar. 40-plus-year-old event, Promenade Days, Centre Around Canada Day. Why change it? Because it's 40 years. But now, why not? And what it's turned into, as you mentioned before, Open Air Dunlop, which consists now of a partnership event with the air show, largest free air show in the province. We continue with our Canada Day celebration. We brought in a Butter Tart Festival now we claim it's second to Midland's fantastic show, but we've got it. We've got a classic car show, brings 500 cars, classic cars to our main street. We're now adding RVs and boats and other activities. We've got and Eats on the Streets, similar to Taste of Danforth, where we highlight our culinary sector. We've also then added in a whole new music festival called the Troubadour Festival, Summer Concert Series. Last year we brought Juno award-winning performers, Dean Brody, Brett Kissel. We brought in Hawksley Workman. This year, we've got a fantastic lineup. Stay tuned because it'll be announced officially at the beginning of March.
Oh, come on, we want the sneak peek.
I got to hold tight on this one, but first week of March, we're going to get this year's lineup. Again, award-winning performers that come to our downtown. It's absolutely fantastic.
So with that in mind, though, again, we're going to go back to the competition. We're going to go back to, for example, some of these festivals take place right at the same time that there's something going on next door in the long weekend in the summer event series, concert event series with Burles Creek, Boots and Hearts, for example, going on. But you talked about really what I heard you say was creating the reason to travel here, creating the destination, and that takes effort, that takes specific work. Some municipalities or hamlets or townships, et cetera, have some natural elements that bring people, visitors there. Niagara Falls, for example, or Niagara-on-the-Lake has the theater scene that brings people in. Stratford, similarly. Elora Gorge, or Elora has the gorge and the river and the historic downtown. Barrie has to work to create that audience in that center. But you talk about these counters for a reason, 40-kilometer radius coming in. Economically, that sounds like GDP. That sounds like gross domestic product is not just shuffling the existing dollars around, but creating a reason for new dollars to come in.
Yes.
Talk to me about your approach for that.
Yeah, so GDP, as we know, gross domestic product, you just stated it. I've got our version of GDP, which is gross downtown product. And so again, the similar idea of using a basket of goods and services and using those to collect and measure what the downtown is worth, because to your point, and I'll come back to describe sort of what we use for that GDP measure, but you're absolutely right. Like we got to look at Barrie in terms of how we fit within our greater area of attractions. We don't necessarily have a natural, the world's natural
wonder
wonders,
of the world,
right?
Yeah.
Niagara Falls, as you mentioned, but we've got so many collectively great local attractions. So whether it be just our naturalization area, our trail system, that then supports a great golfing realm, a great skiing combination. But again, they're not necessarily in the core of our city. They're out in the area. So we got to be an additional reason, right? An additional reason to support it, because we're not going to get someone just specifically coming to the downtown. So it's that après ski, après golf. It's the feeling. It's the great beach. Yes, we're beside the world's longest freshwater beach, the world's longest freshwater. But we've got the best probably urban beach that you could come to. You can take that beach in clean water, experience it, and go visit the world's longest freshwater beach, but come back to us. And so that GDP for us is, collectively, what do our 300 businesses mean? What it means is that if you take all the employees within our downtown, we're in the top 5 largest employers privately and publicly. So we're about 2,000 employees.
So we've got the city of Barrie, we got what, the college and the hospital?
College, hospital, you can fit probably the county in there. You said the college, right? Yeah. So we would be in that 5.
So I'm just going to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
We got just barely 2 minutes before we got to go, but just a little plug here. The longest freshwater beach, Wasaga, is pretty much out of business as they do some major historical milestone renovations. So that's probably going to bring people down to the downtown. We also have some other things that are exciting happening in the downtown, including the brand new STEM Center from Lakehead and Georgian's investment that's going to drive traffic. Obviously, the world's constantly in flux, geopolitical issues, student visas, et cetera. We got to go. Wrap it up in one sentence, if you will. What does the future of Barrie look like?
It couldn't be brighter. So you hit some great points there. We are looking so forward to having students back in the downtown. We used to have Central. When Central closed, all of a sudden it was noticeable that hundreds of students, were not downtown. To have Lakehead back down here, to have Georgian College back down with those students, body and staff, that's energy. That's filling out those 24 hours and 7 days a week. We got a performing arts center that is understandably breaking ground this year. That's going to bring people down constantly. There's other activities that are happening, whether it be sporting or business or even residential. I know we aren't responsible for the residential part of it, but more people living downtown. means a better, healthier, more vibrant downtown. And so the future is very, very bright.
Addressing the perception of safety and community. Craig Stevens, you've been at the helm of this for 20 years. Certainly appreciate your investment, that of your board, obviously that's instrumental, or those members who are instrumental in allowing you to do and shape the work that you do for the downtown. Really enjoyed this hour with you. I look forward to having you back. Please extend our best to you and your proprietors and all of the stakeholders that you have, but keep up the great work, Craig.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Right, and we'll see you next time on Barrie City on the Move. Take care.